Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Jessie, and welcome back to another episode of Rewire to Inspire. The show where we'll dive into self-love, learn tangible ways to rewire the brain, and discovering your soul's purpose. The goal of Rewire to Inspire is to encourage listeners to begin doing the hard work, to get curious and open to maximizing your life. Our mindset shapes how we live. Depending on life events, traumas, and personal experiences, our mindsets are all vastly different. However, one thing we all have in common is the ability to rewire our mind, to change the narrative, and to pivot our lives. I hope you leave each episode with the belief that you are so worthy to live a life true to you. I look forward to chatting with you every single Tuesday and Thursday and helping you grow exponentially in all areas of your life. Without further ado, here's today's episode. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to my podcast, Rewire to Inspire. I am your host, Jessie Brown, and I am super excited to dive into today's episode, which is number 95. Today's topic is one that I did a deep dive on yesterday when I was researching for what I wanted to talk about. And I always like to talk about things that I'm feeling in my personal life and also themes that I'm seeing. And one thing that I think we can all benefit from is today's topic. And so today we're going to be talking about, are you overstimulated / overstimulating yourself? So you might be sitting there going, I don't know, what does that mean? Because I had never really heard it in this context until last week when I was scrolling on TikTok and I heard someone say, I'm overstimulated. And there can be different regards to why you would use this sentence, obviously. But in regards to today, I'm talking about dopamine and the dopamine hits that we feel when we do certain things and the stimuli that our body receives from that. But basically what being overstimulated means is when our senses are completely overloaded with information. We are just maxed out. We are taking on too much. We have too much on the go. And so I knew I wanted to sit down and do some deep dive research into this topic because lately I've been waking up in the mornings feeling very groggy, very off, very low. And I will say I normally get like this in the winter to some extent, but this year just seems to hit different. And I can't seem to shake the blues and I can't seem to shake the anxiety that's within me and days of just depression that I've never really felt before. And it comes in waves because it doesn't really last the whole day. But one thing that I keep asking myself is, what could that be coming from? What is happening in my life now that wasn't happening a couple years ago? And the main thing that I kept circling back to is technology and screen time. Those are the two things that are highest now than they ever have been at any other point in my life. And so I got curious about that. Turns out I wasn't wrong. It is largely linked to a lot of issues and a lot of things that we are going to chat about today. So without further ado, let's dive into episode 95, Are You Overstimulated? One thing I encourage you to ask yourself is, if you struggle with being productive, are you like the best procrastinator in the world? Like, do you struggle to just get things done? And I'm not really talking about things that you have to get done. I'm more so talking about things outside of that. And maybe those day-to-day things have also just begun to feel impossible, heavier, harder, more challenging, more impossible than before. So I encourage you to ask yourself that question. And my goal of today's episode is to unpack some of the reasons that might be behind that. What might be going on behind that procrastination? And of course, with any topic, with anything, there is lots of different reasons that this could be happening. There's lots of different avenues. We are all unique individuals. But this is a main theme that I think we can all relate to because almost every single one of us has at least one piece of technology that we touch on a day-to-day basis that is affecting us. So what's an interesting fact is that our body's way of living and our environments and our resources and our knowledge and our way of being has changed pretty substantially, if you think about it, just in the last decade. We are just constantly changing and evolving as human beings. And I'll get back to that technology piece, but just recognize that we change all the time. There's always this new thing. There's always a new commercial for the newest car, the newest computer, the newest robot, the newest app. Just there's always new things all the time. But what's interesting, and this is very interesting, is that our brains have not changed, or have changed very little, I will say, since human existence has really been around. So for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, our brains are basically the same. So we have to think about that for a minute, that our brains are wired pretty similarly now as they were thousands of years ago, when our focus was obviously completely different and technology was not at the tips of our fingertips. And because, obviously back then our brains were designed for different things. They were designed for survival, for reproduction, and for getting to the next day. And that was pretty much it in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, there was still emotions and things in between that. But in the grand scheme of things, our brain's job at that time was simply to provide food, to hunt food, to gather food, to keep us alive, to reproduce so we can keep living as a society. And when you think about that, I want you to imagine you're back there. You're back then, thousands of years ago. And I want you to imagine you are hunting for your next meal. And you see, let's say, what's an animal that we could choose? You see, let's just say a deer. I don't know what they would have hunted for back then. Let's just say you see a deer and your brain lights up. You're like, holy smokes, dinner, there's food. Like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I see it, I spot it, we're going to get it. What is happening is your brain is lighting up and it's sending signals of dopamine to your brain. And what that's doing is that's giving you motivation to want to go and hunt that thing so that you can feed yourself and your family to sustain yourself. And so, you use that impulse, you get that motivation, you go get that deer and you feed your family. And that is really the cycle of how dopamine helps us in those instances to survive. But if we think about back then, there really wasn't a whole lot to do outside of survival. Again, I wasn't there. I didn't live at that time. I can just imagine that there probably wouldn't have been much to do outside of just trying to stay warm, trying to survive, trying to stay hydrated, etc., etc. But the reason that I'm mentioning this, and the reason that this is going to tie in, is because the reason that you would be so motivated to go hunt or to gather is the exact same reason that we're so motivated to go on social media, to answer those emails, to click that notification, to hear that bell in the back of on our phone and in the back of our brain go, oh, I need to answer that, to check your text messages, to go shopping, etc. And the reason behind that is, like I mentioned, a brain chemical called dopamine. And what's interesting is I want you to ask yourself what you think of dopamine, because I, for the longest time, thought dopamine was that happy hormone that we got. In reality, what's interesting is that dopamine is actually a happy chemical indeed, but in actuality, what happens is it gives off its release just with the action of it. So basically, dopamine isn't the aftermath, it's the before. It's the saying, I'm going to go shopping, and you get super, super excited, but then during the shopping experience, you likely don't feel maybe as good, and then after you're like, It's the same with junk food. You get super, super excited. Oh my gosh, I'm going to eat this junk food. And then after you eat it, you're like, It's the same thing when we get a notification on our phone. We get a notification, there's a dopamine hit, we have a sense of motivation to want to go check what that thing is, and then we end up checking our phone and then crashing. So what's interesting about dopamine that I never realized is it's actually happening before the action. It is what motivates us to go do something. It is not the aftermath in that. And so I kept thinking about this and I'm like, we have almost in a way become slaves to dopamine hits, right? Like everything in our world is designed to be as pleasurable as possible, right? We can get food at the snap of our fingers. We can go get junk food easily. We can go shopping at just a touch of a screen. We can scroll TikTok and get insanely large amounts of content in a little amount of time. And so our brain can so quickly just get these little dopamine hits, little dopamine hits, little dopamine hits, and we feel good, we feel good, we feel good, and then we crash. And it's in those in-between times that we end up feeling really low, really depressed, really lost and uncertain. And I'm starting to realize the pattern of this and why I think so many of our youth are struggling so much with their purpose and with ambition. It's because we've just become so hardwired to chase that dopamine and not actually chase the things in which we want. Our dopamine system is controlling us to do things for reward, not because we actually want, / most importantly, should be doing them. And so I share all this with you because there really is hope. I do believe that there is hope and a way to rewire our brain to get these feel-good moments on a bigger level than just a notification or a shopping spree. But we must be willing to ask ourselves, how much stimuli do we want to partake in? How much do we want to take in? And if I have any people out there listening that enjoy camping or enjoy the wilderness or enjoy disconnecting, I want you to think of it from this perspective, because anytime that I've ever gone camping and I get to disconnect, I always just feel so good. I feel so much more present with the people that are around me. The food that I'm eating always tastes better. If there's water around, I'm just so much more appreciative of the water. It's almost like a meditative experience in and of itself. And I think that the reason for that is because we're forced in a way to just disconnect and not have those dopamine hits for a minute. We have to cook for ourselves over a flame. We have to make that fire first. We have to build our shelter. So our priorities are just so much different. And obviously I'm talking like off-grid camping, not these glorious motorhomes that we have these days that are basically like a house. But if you're a hiker or a camper, or you just like to get off grid, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's also those days that we just decide to go outside and not bring social media or technology with us. We feel good. We're disconnected. And it's just so interesting because in a world that we're trying to be so connected, we feel disconnected, and yet we try to be disconnected from the thing that's making us feel disconnected. I hope that landed, because that's been really pondering in my mind the last couple hours of just like, wow, like I need to really take some time away from screen time and do things that are less dopamine wired and more wired of things that I know that I maybe don't want to do, but know that I need to do. And that is how we begin to rewire our brain. And I do truly think that the pandemic really heightened this for a lot of us, especially if your job had to pivot or if you had to work from home, or even regardless when we were on isolation. If you had to still go to work, you might have not experienced this as much, but it did still affect us all in some way, shape, or form subconsciously. And this obviously ebbs and flows depending on your circumstance. But I truly think that it heightened this dopamine cycle for a lot of us, because most of us who worked from home had a different connection with digital work from home versus the office. And, hence why I think a lot of us are so disconnected and depressed when we almost became slaves to our computers. And every time an email went off, we were fearful of, if I'm not working for 2 seconds, I'm going to get in trouble. If I don't answer that email right now, that could mean et cetera, et cetera. If I'm 2 minutes late for that meeting, it could mean et cetera, et cetera. When in reality, if we think about in-person work, it's never like that. You have little conversations down the hallway with your coworker. You're sometimes late for meetings. You're sometimes early for meetings, and you mingle with people. It was just a completely different way of living and learning that humanity has never experienced before. We've never experienced to that detriment without like any capability to go outside of that before. We were forced in a way to take that on. And I think it affected us a lot more than we think that it did. And so my goal is to just bring awareness that that is likely happening, and it's likely affecting all of us, because no matter which industry you're in, we're glued to our phones. We are stuck to our phones. Every time I go out to eat and my partner has to go to the bathroom, or whoever I'm with has to go leave the table and I'm forced to sit there by myself, I try really, really hard to not just pick up my phone, because I do think that it is a comfort thing, but I do also think it is those little dopes, those little hits of dopamine. Did anybody text me? Did anybody comment on my picture? Did anybody download my podcast? And we're just constantly like seeking that validation, seeking those hits. And when we don't get that, we end up feeling crummy and really down, and we hurt our self-esteem and we hurt ourselves, when in reality, all those things don't matter in the grand scheme of things. And so I encourage you to ask yourself, in order to rewire our brain and in order to shift this, we have to bring awareness to it so that we know what's going on. And so one thing I encourage you to ask yourself is, what is actually adding value to your life? What actually makes you feel better when you do it than when you don't? Doing things, this is going to be my challenge for you guys to leave you with, is to do less stimulating things. Look for ways to do things that don't give you that instant feel-good hit, but that it gives you that after. Eating junk food, we all know, feels good in the moment, but after, we almost always regret it. Our body hurts, we wish we didn't do it, and we wish we could go back. But how many times have you read a book or gone to the gym or done something productive and said, I wish I didn't do that? Very, very rarely. And so doing things that are less stimulating for a while, so your brain actually begins to look forward to them. Again, reading, working out, going for walks, getting outside, doing things out of your comfort zone, doing creative things with your hands, just disconnecting. I encourage you to create a list of go-to things and try to do them for even a month and see how you feel. Exercise, sleep, music, meditation, sitting in the sunshine, being bored. This is a huge one that I want to incorporate into my life, and I've been encouraging my partner to incorporate into his life as well, is we are so bad at being bored. We don't know what to do with ourselves. We're like hardwired to feel like we always need to be doing something. There has to be something on the TV, or we have to be doing something, or, you know, we have to clean the house, we have to cook dinner, we have to look after the kids, we have to do X, Y, and Z. But I encourage you to just be bored every day for like 5 minutes. Sit there with your thoughts, sit there with your body, sit there with yourself and with your mind, and go internally for a minute. We are constantly just outwards and looking outwards, and everything within gets neglected and gets forgotten. And it's not until we have that forced time when everything just seems like too much. But if we can take little chunks of time throughout our day to normalize that feeling of being bored, getting comfortable being with yourself, that is one of the most beautiful relationships that we can build. Because as I was expressing to my partner the other day, you know, we're only guaranteed ourselves. We're all we have, technically, in the grand scheme of things. So why do we as humans have such a hard time making that connection with self? Why is self-love and self-care and doing things for yourself such a selfish thing, when if that relationship at the core isn't strong and isn't feeling good and isn't comfortable, we're going to, in some way, shape, or form, project that outwards. We're going to have a hard time being our true, authentic self if we don't have that organic relationship with self. So I really encourage you to take time for the next week to just be bored. Try it for a minute, try it for 2 minutes, try it for 5 minutes, work your way up and just notice what happens. Don't give in to impulses is the second one, which can be really, really hard to do, but I'm challenging myself to not give in to 10 impulses a day. If I get a text, I leave it. If I get an email that's outside of work and doesn't need responded to right away, I leave it. If I get some kind of cue in my brain to go check social media just because, I leave it. I'm trying to just tell my brain, hey, we don't have to give into cues this quickly just because you feel like I need to. The only reason I'm giving into this is because it's going to feel good for a second and then it's going to go away. So that's another great thing that you can do to start to rewire your brain to not pick up on them so quickly, is to stop picking up on them. Another huge thing that I encourage you guys to do is to not look at your phone for at least the first hour of your day. I usually set my alarm, I shut my alarm off, I get up, and I do not touch my phone for an hour. If anybody needs to get a hold of me, they can get a hold of me after that hour has passed. I do leave my ringer on, so if anybody calls me and it's an emergency, I'm able to pick up, but I do not want to touch my phone for the first hour of my day. A, because it's not good for us and we instantly go into that cycle, but B, because if you know anything about your sleep pattern, it is in those last couple hours of sleep and in the first little while of waking up that we are still recovering from our sleep from the night before. All the neuroplasticity and all the work that our brain has done all night to repair itself and to heal in a way through our sleep is still happening for the next hour or two after we wake up. But if we just jump on our phone, we're actually breaking that cycle from happening. And I don't think a lot of us realize that this is happening. And I want to do a whole episode on this in and of itself because it is like a lot to take in. But basically, for the takeaway for today is looking at your phone first thing in the morning and starting that cycle over again is going to make you feel more exhausted later in the day. It's going to make you feel more down. It's going to make you just feel a sense of and just exhaustion because our body's doing everything it can through our sleep cycle to repair our mind and repair our body. And we're breaking that for ourselves first thing in the morning. And also try to get off your phone a little bit before bed because the same thing is happening in reverse. We're going to bed with these, looking at TikTok and doing all these things. And I am guilty of this. I am guilty of scrolling on TikTok before bed. And I'm challenging myself to stop doing this because I recognize that my sleep is usually crummier after I do that. I don't sleep as well. I find my dreams are weird. I have a harder time waking up. So just be mindful of how technology and all these dopamine hits really are affecting our day-to-day life. It's beginning to find ways, again, to enjoy the things that make our lives better and that's actually adding value to your life. Go for those walks, get outside, connect with actual human beings instead of sending that text message. Stop giving into so many impulses and notice how it feels. Let's stop becoming owners of dopamine hits and instead be our own unique beings that are doing things that we know we need to do, but might not necessarily want to do, but we'll always thank ourselves for doing them. So I truly hope you guys left today's episode with more of an understanding of what dopamine is, how it affects our lives, how it affects our brain, why limiting our technology is so important. Not looking at your phone for the last hour and first hour of your day, and taking time to just be bored, to sit in solitude so that your mind and your body can get on the same page for a second and just take a deep breath. So thank you guys so much as always. I hope you guys enjoyed today's content. If you guys are looking to connect, you can find my link in the description below to book a free 30-minute call with me. Again, I'm not going to try to sell you anything. I just want to connect with you guys, hear your stories, hear where you're coming from, and hopefully provide you with a little bit of insight and guidance and help you take your life to the next level. So thank you guys so much as always. All the love. Until next time. Bye, you guys. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's episode of Rewire to Inspire. I absolutely love connecting with you all, so make sure you're following me on Instagram. I am at Jessie Brown 13. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to leave a review or share with someone you think would enjoy. I look forward to chatting with you all next episode. And remember, get out of your head and into your heart.